And we are live. Good evening, everyone. I hope you're doing well, that you had a nice beginning of the week, and all that. It's been a while since we had an interview with a member of the European Parliament in English. The French have been lucky on the channel lately. We've had quite a few interviews in French, but we're back with the core content interviews in English with members of the European Parliament. So I'm very happy that we're going back to the basics. Our guest tonight, so like I said, is an MEP. It's Isabel Carvalhais. She's a Portuguese MEP from the Socialist and Democrats group. So we are on the left side of EU politics. She was elected in 2019, so that's her first mandate in the European Parliament. And now she's in the Parliament, of course, and she works in the Committee on Agriculture and Rural Development, the Committee on Fisheries, and she's a substitute in the Committee on Regional Development. And to give you an idea of tonight's discussion, within these committees, she works particularly on the place of rural areas, sustainable agriculture, social inclusions, this sort of thing. So we're going to talk a lot about agriculture, the place of rural areas. As usual, before we start, a small reminder of the rules for those of you who would be new with us tonight. So our guest will stay with us for up to 1 hour. After that, she unfortunately will have to go to work some more, she told me. But you will not be free either, because we will stay another half an hour at least, we will see according to the discussion, to debrief the interview, discuss your impressions, cover questions that I could not cover during the interview, etc., and just have a nice chat. You know how it goes. As usual, I have prepared my own questions for our guest based on our priorities, etc. Of course, you can suggest your questions and react in the chat. It's there for that. I will keep an eye on it. But as usual, do it without spamming and while staying civil. And small reminder, I know it could be obvious, we on a channel that talks about EU politics, but reminder, we're here to talk about EU politics, so no national politics unless it's linked to EU politics. So keep that in mind when asking your question in the chat and so on. And I think I've covered the usual bits, so let's dive into this. Good evening, Isabel Carvalhais. Thank you very much for being with us tonight to answer our questions. So you heard me doing a mandatory introduction, introduce who you are, what are your main priorities. Is there anything that I have missed or that you would like to add before we start the interview itself?
Okay, thank you so much. It's wonderful to be here with you, to join you. I'm really excited and nervous at the same time, really. I would say that, I think it would be useful for people to know that I come from an academic background. I actually from political science. I've been teaching for 25 years now, or 26 years. Not now, because now I'm in the parliament, although I'm still supervising PhDs and so forth. And so my main interests as an academic, so that people also understand this, are related to citizenship studies. And I've been working for 20 years, especially on the political and social integration of migrants.
Okay.
So this is it's a bit different from what I'm doing in the European Parliament. But at the same time, if we have to find a connection, when I was in the beginning here, the mandate in the Commission of Agriculture and Rural Development, I realized that this eagerness, this interest that I always have about the margins, those who are excluded, those who are, sometimes not excluded, but struggling to be recognized. This also applies when we are talking about, for instance, agricultural labor, agricultural workers.
Mm-hmm.
It applies also to rural areas in general terms, to rural communities. So that I always try to find a connection to my previous lens, to my previous perspective.
Mm-hmm.
And I find very useful at the same time the things I can do with my previous knowledge in sociology and political science, and try to use it as much as possible also here.
And speaking of which, I was going to ask the question afterwards, but since we're talking about it now, you mentioned you're an academic by trade, you work on social inclusion, etc. Why then choosing to go into the agricultural committee and not AMPOL or AFCO committee, the topic that could be arguably more related to what you were studying as an academic?
Well, it's also relevant, I think, for people, for those who are joining us and most likely do not know this. I came to the European Parliament in September 2019 as a substitute, as a new member to substitute one of our colleagues who passed away very tragically.
Okay.
Yeah. And so when I arrived, quite frankly, I didn't even put the question of choosing the commissions. I had in my mind that I had to be here and to take the commissions that would be relevant for him, because he was from Açores, and agriculture and fisheries and regional development are very, very important portfolios for the outermost regions, for Azores and Madeira. And so it was very clear in my mind, this was what I had to do, and I'm quite glad I did this choice.
And so since you arrived in the parliament, so it's September 2019, so the MEPs formally took their seat in July, so a few months, you arrived a few months after. I imagine it was very sudden, huh? You did not anticipate that, so how did you deal with the fact that suddenly you get a call? Well, unfortunately, the person you were substituting for deceased, died, and now you're a member of the European Parliament. How do you, first starters, how long before joining the Parliament did you know, and how did you deal with this transition that was very sudden for you and even for your family, etc.?
I still have difficulty somehow to remember all this, because most people, they were saying congratulations, oh, you're going to the European Parliament, and I couldn't at the same time have this joy, because the circumstances were really dramatic, and for all these reasons. And at the same time, I did have to take this decision, because I was not planning. I must say also, for those who don't know me, and I'm sure the majority doesn't know me, I was elected as independent in the list of the Socialist Party, but not as a member of the Socialist Party, meaning that I didn't have previously any political experience, and I accepted to go to the campaign because, this is also important, I've always been very committed in talking about European citizenship to students, to my students, and to people, and going to high schools, for instance, and talking to young people about the importance of the European project. And so I thought, wow, this is an opportunity for me to leave the academic plateau and go into the real thing, and try to do something with the things I've been talking about over 20 years. But I did this, with open heart, without thinking whether I would be elected or non-elected. So suddenly I had to make a decision, and I did it. And I think, when we have to, we have to. And I was very glad to take, at the same time, I was glad to have the courage to take this challenge.
So no regrets. That's good to hear.
No regrets.
And so Dad received a question around this from someone. So how did you get? Since you mentioned that you were on the list as an independent, you were not part of the Socialist Party, despite being on the list. How did you get spotted? And then the Socialist Party say, "Hey, do you want to be on our list?" How did that work?
Well, basically, I was invited by the federation. We are organized in districts. Well, I will not bother you with this, but I was invited. It was actually my birthday on the 28th of February. And I said, "Oh, this is very, unusual. I have to think about it." And the person told me, "I'm sorry, but you have to make a decision now. How do you reach my name?" Well, your name was spoken out by several members of the federation. They know you from the academic background as a professor at the university. You are a person with the values, with the principles that we find valuable and important for the Socialist Party. That's why we are inviting you. But I'm sorry, we don't have much time for you to decide. And I had to take the decision. And I thought, oh, well, I will not be elected, so why not? This is a good opportunity to help those who believe in these values. And I've always been a woman in the left. So it was okay. I didn't have to think about this. And so I took the decision.
So it sounds like your entry in EU politics was a lot of decision taken,
Oh,
not
yeah.
on the spot, but at the last moment, without nearly anticipating necessarily or planning that it would happen that way. Interesting. So now you're in the parliament. You ended up in the agri committee, so talking about agriculture, and within this committee you work on sustainable farming, on sustainable agriculture. So first, when we're talking about sustainable farming, what are we talking about? Are we talking about just the small family of farming? Are we talking about bio? What exactly do we put behind this buzzword, sustainable farming?
Yeah, it's a buzzword, but I would say that all farming should be sustainable. When we say sustainable, it means that it implies practices that, on one hand, are economically viable because you have to have a profitable activity, but at the same time also respect the environment and make the best use, the most efficient use of nutrients, of water, of natural resources. That's what sustainability is about. That's why it's not about, being a family dimension. It's not about one type or this type of agriculture. All types of agriculture should be sustainable. Otherwise, they should not even be considered. So that's why, although I tend to be very engaged, in defending organic farming, agroecological practices in farming, I'm not against other models of agriculture as long as they are sustainable. That's what's about. So, yeah.
So for you, the opposition that we often hear, like between the small farmer and the big exploitation, is a bit artificial as an opposition. As long as the practice are sustainable, that's fine by you. Both can coexist, and that's not an issue.
Different models can coexist, but of course we have to understand that when you are a small farmer, you have much more difficulties in accessing European funding. You have more difficulties in accessing how can I say, even access to financing. For instance, if you have to go to a bank,
Two banks,
if you are a young farmer, it's even worse. So it's not an artificial division. There is a difference between being a big farmer and a small farmer. What I say that they can both manage to have sustainable models of agriculture. And in fact, and this is also tricky, sometimes those who are bigger, they are more capable of being sustainable, which is a bit unfair. And let me see if I make this clear. But when you have the resources, the financial resources, the technical resources, it's easier for you, for instance, to help to have innovative projects in your lands because you can afford to take the risk. And small farmers, family farming, sometimes, you can't take the risk of putting money aside. You don't even have that chance to go into an innovative project and so forth. So that's why I think we have to be more we have to give more support to these small farmers. And although this new CAP, the Common Agricultural Policy, tries to do this in a certain way, I think it's better than the previous framework. There is still a lot to be done in terms of helping out these people. And why is that important? Because the majority of farmers in Europe are actually small farmers, and they are the ones who are, giving life and vitality to the rural areas. And if we don't fight for them, they will disappear, obviously.
Something that you mentioned was managing in a sustainable way resources. So Portugal, being very south of Europe, is at a higher risk than other countries of suffering from drought. Even we're seeing already right now in Spain in April there's already a huge heat wave, etc. And we're seeing for the past couple of years big droughts that are causing a lot of problem in farmings. At the same time, a statistic that we hear a lot the last couple of years is, and that is very debated, it has to be said, is a statistic saying that to produce 1 kilogram of meat, you require 15,000 liters of water. A statistic that is very debated. But with that in mind, and again, the idea that Portugal is very sensitive to drought, at the same time, Portugal is also a country that produces a lot of milk, a lot of cows, etc., etc. So how do you balance on the one hand the economic interest, the legitimate economic interest for Portugal and also for farmers to have to have cows that produce milk and something that is economically interesting, and at the same time, the need to manage a water resource that is becoming more and more scarce and difficult to obtain and maintain.
Yeah, your question is wonderful, and it implies it would imply many answers. One issue definitely is that we're facing climate change. It's not like 30 years ago when this was basically models that we were discussing. One of these days we will have to face climate change. Now we are facing it, and the droughts and the severe droughts that we are facing versus in the south is it's quite clear. I mean, it's so managing water is really important. We have less and less rain, and we have to be capable of retaining rain, which is one of the difficulties. And obviously, this implies technological innovation. It implies investment, and it's not an easy thing, but it's something that has to be done for sure. Now, about the production, it's not just the production of milk. If you look carefully, there are many products that we eat, and if we could see the water that it takes for them to be produced and for us to consume them, it's really impressive. I would say that European consumers should have this information. I know that this is, very problematic to suggest this in terms of labeling of information, but if we could all know how much water is needed, I won't say wasted, but is needed for the production of vegetables and fruits and milk and meat and whatever, it's amazing for us as consumers to be more aware of the impact of the way we consume and the way we waste food, for instance. Milk, of course, for instance, is a very important production in my region up in the north. But I should say this, that for instance, Portugal has a strong tradition of extensive livestock. And these models of extensive livestock, like os montados in the south, but also you can find in the northern part of Portugal, they have been one of the very few things that people in the rural areas can grab at and get some sort of profit, of income, and for them is really important. When you see these shepherds disappearing and the abandonment of the pastures, you start seeing more fires. So instead of helping out the environment, it's becoming even worse. So I think it's important that people also realize that there are sustainable ways, sustainable models, forest models, extensive livestock models, where you can combine this environmental dimension and at the same time have this social and economic dimension, so that people in the rural areas will not have to leave and simply to close doors. And this is really important, especially in countries like Portugal and Spain, where you see this aging of rural populations, and people, certain areas being almost empty, wiped out of people. So it's important to have something to grab them and to make them stay.
Actually, the question of aging population farmer is something that I'm going to cover a bit later, because I understand that you have a report, you're doing a report on this topic, so it will be interesting to discuss it. A question derived from a comment in the chat. So we understand that there is a tension today between, on the one side, farmers and the, let's say, the sustainability objectives and policies. And recently we saw in the Netherlands, in the latest elections, a farmers party, what started as a farmers party, BBB, making a break in the elections, and it started as something to defend farmers against what they saw as too extreme a policy to fight to have more sustainable policy. It was about a ban on nitrogen entrant, etc., etc. For you, seeing the rise of these parties like BBB in the Netherlands that are very much focused on defending farmers' interest against what they see as disproportionate policies on sustainability? Is it something that that is positive, that worries you? How do you see that?
It worries me a lot for various reasons. First, because I well, maybe it's an academic prejudice that I have, but I tend to look at political parties and pressure groups and lobbies as completely different things, of course. And quite frankly, political parties, they didn't appear in society over the decades just to represent one sector of the population, one profession, one activity. That's not what they are supposed to be as mediators of public interest between the state and society. But regardless of these sort of comments, I tend to be very worried about this because, first of all, we should all be looking at farmers as, environmental gatekeepers, as those who are really interested, and the majority of them are interested in keeping our environment healthy because they know that otherwise they will not have their activity in the future anymore. But I think there is a great lack of good communication, and many people, many elements or actors are involved in this equation. The sector itself has not been able, as I see it, over the years to communicate a positive image to citizens, to public opinion. Our mistake as well as politicians, we haven't been able to help our farmers have a more positive image in society. And so I understand that many of them feel angry and feel disgusted and feel that we are not recognizing their importance in society. And this kind of these phenomena, these parties, for instance, I think they are a consequence precisely of this anger, of this feeling of frustration, of not being heard. That's why it's so important not to leave aside the rural world. And if we don't take this as a political priority, oh yes, we will definitely see more of these phenomena in the future. And we have to be worried about this because I don't think that going radical is the best way to deal with our problems in society. It's definitely not the best way.
So a debate that was in the parliament a couple of years ago, if I remember correctly, was it made the headlines in the bubble at the time. Was there was an amendment in the parliament on I think it was at the vote of the CAP on whether we should call a vegan burger a burger or vegan meat
Yeah.
on the appellation. And so there was a Portuguese person who was questioning, saying, "Oh, but in the EU, because of the EU, it's not possible. It's forbidden to call things like soy milk or almond milk milk. It's not you can't sell that as milk. So why is it forbidden, especially on ground of consumer protection? How is that dangerous for consumers to call soy milk milk?"
Well, it's an very interesting question. I think that well, there is a point in not calling it milk. Quite frankly, I think on one hand, consumers, they are becoming more and more informed, and perhaps in the future they will not need that we be so pedagogical about the way we approach these things. Personally, I don't like very much that we tell people exactly how to mention this or that, because it looks like we're not believing in the capacity of the consumer to make his or her own decisions and to see this is a vegan burger or this is whatever. And so I really don't like very much, but I understand also at the same time that we have to make sure that all consumers are provided with the best information. And in this case, well, it's not milk. And what's wrong about saying it's a beverage or it's a juice or whatever? It's okay. It's fine. It doesn't have to be almond milk or to be nuts milk. No. And why should it be milk? I mean, if it's a vegan drink, why does it have to have a name of a dairy product, a dairy designation? And quite even with burger, you know, if I go for vegan, I know I go for vegan, and so I'm not. I at least I don't imagine myself wanting to buy things that remind me eating meat or remind me eating fish, because that would be exactly what I would be avoiding. And one thing is that we have very consumers who are very aware of what they are doing, what they are buying as vegans, as vegetarians. But many other consumers, they also have problems in distinguishing products. So in a sense, what the European Union was trying to do was, to create shortcuts to help out the consumers to make the best identifications. If we are being successful or not, well, I'm sure we will have different approaches on that, because even those who are in the sector will complain, I'm sure, those who are in the sector of livestock, for instance. But yeah, the intention was basically this, to help out the consumer in a world of many options that not everybody is at the moment capable of understanding. So there will be evolution also in the future, I'm sure.
Okay. We already talked about it a little bit already. The question of the place of rural areas. Like you've worked on a report on the strategy, EU strategy around rural areas. So why should I'm going to ask a voluntary or provocative question, but why should the EU care about rural areas? What's the point? What's the stake for everyone?
Oh yeah, I think we should really care a lot. I mean, if you look at Brexit, Brexit had the majority of votes in rural areas. If you look at other places like the elections in France, in Finland, you see what we were talking about a few minutes before. When you think that when you have this feeling of not being heard on a daily basis, not being equated by the policymakers, of course you tend to become radical, and sometimes radical in the worst way possible, I would say, because it implies going for a populist discourse and so forth. I think this 30% of European population that tends to be very much disregarded over the years really has to be looked carefully. And otherwise, what we will see in Europe is an increase of populist approaches where these people will find or think they will find their answers, because it's a speech of frustration. It's a speech that gives voice to what they feel as the lack of engagement in the policy making. And so I would say this is a very clear political priority in the European agenda. But my fear is that we say this all the time, that this should be a political priority. But then when it comes to ground, neither member states or not even European Union as a whole takes very seriously how important it is to stop the rural world from becoming disconnected from the European project. We have to take care of these people. Otherwise, but yes, I would say we definitely have to look at these rural areas and stop thinking that they must exist because, they are so important for the continuity of the urban world. Because this is one of the arguments sometimes we hear. The rural world is very important because they provide us food and ecosystemic services. So we tend to look at the rural world as a world whose existence is justified by the fact that they are relevant for the urban areas.
And so it's a bit of second-rate areas, basically, is the way you...
Exactly. And that is not true. They are relevant for themselves. They are not relevant because they justify their existence in relation to the urban world. And this idea that the urban areas, if we bet on urban areas, this will spread development for the rural world. This is a paradigm with 30 years that we know now did not work. So trying to accomplish development for the rural areas by betting in the development of peri-urban and urban areas is not the same thing. And what we'll see is, the resources still going for the urban areas, especially the big ones, while the rural areas become less and less attractive for people living there.
And so what should you do to defend rural areas and make them like not second-rate areas at the service of the continuation of urban areas, but like self-standing with their own interests and so their own priorities? What should you do in that field?
If we don't want them to be second-rated, then they cannot have second-hand services. They have to have full access to services of general interest, like education services, health services. And when I say health services, for instance, I think about women. And women in the rural areas have real big problems, especially when they want to get access to specific health services. Also services for children, from kindergarten to schooling. All these impacts in the decisions as a young family, as a young man or young woman to stay in a rural area. You have to have stronger connectivity. You have to have easier mobility. This is all if we say this is important for a person living in an urban area, of course it is also important for someone living in a rural area. And one of the biggest problems is that even when you have money for a project in farming, wonderful project, with technological innovation and so forth, if you don't have this general context around you, like digital connectivity, mobility, and so forth, you will give up. After 5 years or 6 years, you will no longer have reasons to stay there. And it's important that people don't leave, don't abandon these areas, especially because elderly people, the older people, elderly people, it's really a bad word nowadays, but older people, it's fundamental for them to have younger generations helping them, in terms of social inclusion, of providing services for them. Otherwise, it becomes, a place of isolation, of social isolation. It's even interesting because sometimes people think about the rural areas as, healthy places for your mental well-being, because you only go there in the weekends or during the weekends.
It's the
When you
holiday
have to
place,
live there, it becomes really, pressuring. So you have to have these conditions to feel that it's really worth having a life project in those areas.
Something that you touched a bit upon, and I wanted to ask towards the end, but I'll cover it now. You mentioned, Brexit. During Brexit, we saw that a large part of the electorate came from rural areas. In France, it's a big political topic, particularly on the left, because we see a debate where, we see that in the rural areas, people tend to vote on the right, and there's a debate around in the political left on the idea that maybe the left abandon rural areas by focusing on priorities that are more prevalent or priority for urban areas, suburbs, like poor suburbs area, but nothing for rural, or rural are just portrayed as the bad people who does agriculture that is bad for the environment. As someone who works both on rural issues and comes from is left wing, do you think that indeed there's been a loss of focus in part of the left around rural areas, or is just that the message of the left these past few years has been more difficult to raise in rural areas?
Well, I think perhaps we could work better our communication, our message, a very clear message that we do care about social inclusion of our citizens in the rural areas. And maybe it's not also, I will not say that it's not our fault, but it's not exclusively our fault, because what we also see over the years is these insistence that the left-wing parties do not care about the rural world. But behind this idea, I think there is also very much another issue, which is to look at rural people as conservative people, because you know, it used to be like this, and it has been over the decades a sort of a trend. But quite frankly, I don't think that these people in the rural areas are voting more conservative or voting in these new populist far-right parties because they are conservative, or because of conservative values and so forth. They are voting that way, and we have to stop it. Of course, it's my view. They are voting that way because they feel abandoned, and not because they are conservative. And especially young people in the rural areas, they are equal to urban people. They have the same fears and dreams and so forth. So the reasons this happens are deep. They are much more complex, obviously, than what I'm saying now. They have sociological explanations. They are different from one country to another country. But one thing that is important is that people understand, and that's why I say perhaps we have to work better our way of communicating. They have to understand that we as socialists, we are never against rural people, because one of our motivations is precisely social inclusion of all people. We don't want anyone be left behind during digital transition, ecological transition, all these these buzzwords that we use. This means people cannot be left behind, regardless of their social condition, of their gender identity. And so this is in our DNA, to be profoundly advocates of solidarity. And the fact that, for instance, now we are quite focused in the Green Deal, for instance, it's not opposite to being very much engaged in thinking about social inclusion, because we think that going in the way of the Green Deal is the best way in the future to keep these people in the rural areas, alive and have sustainable ways of living. Of course, this implies means. And that's one of the struggles that I always have in my, in my work, is to make sure that we talk about this. But remember, people need means, not just financial, but technical and so forth, to make sure that we help them go through this transition so that they can have better rural world in the future, more sustainable agriculture in the future. It's because we care about people that we are striving also for the Green Deal, and not because simply we took out people from the equation. That would be completely out of our DNA as a socialist, as socialists in the European Union.
Something that we also discussed a bit that is a big issue in rural areas and in farming particularly, is the question of generation renewal. In average, farmers are more and more old, meaning that there are less and less young people who choose to go into farming. Can you explain a bit why it's happening and why it's a problem?
Yes, it's a big problem because, the majority of our farmers in Europe are over 60 or 65. So yeah, it's really a big problem. And there are very few young farmers. And when we say young farmers, we're referring to people around 40 or less. 40 years old, okay. Nowadays, we can say we're still young, but it's definitely a problem. And why is that? Because one of the reasons, there are many reasons, of course, but some of them have been already, I have already highlighted them here in this conversation. One has to do with the image that we have created around farming over the years. And we are very much, we still live the legacy of the 19th century, this idea that, going to the cities, to the urban areas, going to industrial jobs, leaving the rural areas, that was the way towards progress. And so over the decades, rural world has been very much connected with, with the past. with something that was fading away, instead of looking at rural world as a world that stands by itself. And so this negative image also influences the way young people and even the way the parents look at the possibility of their children staying in farming. So it's still very normal to listen people saying like, I don't want my son or my daughter to go on having the same job I have because it's, working the fields is really a difficult life. It is a very difficult life. It's we cannot sell this sort of of dream or fake idea that it's easy to be a farmer, because it is not. It is not a 9-to-5 job, and we know this. And even young people, of course, they grew up looking at farming as a non-attractive activity. So one thing that has to be changed is the way we look at this activity, and to make sure that we communicate better to society the importance, the relevance that these people have, for instance, in things like food security. And another thing is that, okay, you can work as much as you want on communicating a positive image of farming and so forth, but if in real terms you don't have the context that I was referring earlier, of course people will not stay. They will leave. They will go to urban areas, or they will go to other countries, whatever. So what is happening in terms of aging population and less younger people in the farming sector is a consequence also of everything else that is happening in the rural areas. But at the same time, what we see, and it's a bit a kind of an irony, but there are so many young farmers that sometimes I think we're talking over and over the need to attract young people to farming, to agriculture. But one thing that we cannot forget is those who are already working, those who are already in the farming sector. So it is also very important that we don't lose these young farmers that are already in the sector. I'm just talking about the ones that are to come. Let's think about these guys and be serious. In 5 years, how many of them will still have their projects in the countryside? And this is very serious. It's again a political priority that I think the European Union should have.
And still around this generation renewal, you said it. It's not only a question of getting young people into farming. It's a question of the overall context. If it's not appealing, it makes it difficult. But I think the point that you made that is very interesting is the question of the image of farming on one side and rural areas. You explained, okay, rural areas are linked to the past. It's not seen linked to progress, etc. Farming is seen as a difficult job. It is. It's not a 9-to-5 job. With now the focus on sustainability, etc., it's true that in the public image, farmers, like I said, don't have a good image. They are more presented as let's say being a cause of climate change rather than an actor of helping. So they become a bit the in French we say bouc émissaire, but the scapegoat, let's say, of society. So how do we change the image to say no, actually farmers are not only useful, but we need them, and there needs to be more of them? How do you change this given that there's all this tendency from the past and from the recent year with the fight against climate change and all that?
I would say that there is still a lot to be done. I mean, not all guys are good guys, and of course there are problems in agricultural sector still to be solved. And I think we will not be honest if we say otherwise, as sometimes I also hear. So not everything is well, but at the same time, it's unfair that we say everything is wrong, and everything is wrong regardless of the wonderful projects that we see young farmers, for instance, and small farmers doing on a daily basis. And I think there should be more attention, from the media, for instance, local media, regional media, to give light, to give focus to these projects. Wonderful things with agroecological practices, technological innovation, young people doing the best to, how can I say, to recover old traditions, because sometimes not everything has to be invented. Sometimes these agroecological practices have been there for ages. They are they've been there since their grandparents and great grandparents, but now they can be used in a completely different way, and they can be boosted because you can use them with the help of technology, of science, of knowledge, of better knowledge. So we should look at these people and give them the attention that we give, to artists, to singers, to YouTubers. Why not? I mean, young farmers, really, I get amazed with the quantity of good things that are happening in terms of social innovation. For instance, it's not just about the farming, but all the things that go around this farming, the pedagogical dimension they can fulfill in schools and so forth. There's so many wonderful things, and I don't think we give enough attention. Usually what we see, are the manifestations and the riots. And of course, there is a space for everything. We have to understand that there is always a reason for these things to happen, but we never have the focus on the positive things. And this should be worked out so that people will have a completely different image of the good side of those who do care about sustainability, or are already doing their efforts towards sustainability, towards the future. Otherwise, I mean, if we don't put the focus, if we don't talk about them, if we don't put them in society, next to the public opinion, people will not know about them. Perhaps also young farmers in their associations, their cooperatives and so forth, perhaps they could work also a bit more in terms of, I won't say forcing, but in terms of saying, we're here, can we present our projects in schools, for instance, to make them be more appreciated and recognized.
Yeah, go a bit out there to show
yeah.
to showcase themselves.
Yeah.
Not a final question, but let's say on the topic of agriculture, moving away, let's say from a pure EU perspective, we have the conflict in Ukraine these days, and these past few days, there's been a whole crisis, all debate around initiatives taken by Poland, by Hungary, by Slovakia about banning in the entry in Europe, in the EU, of Ukrainian grains and other agricultural products, because they have the feeling and they see that the entry in the EU of these products harms the market and reduce the price, and so it makes life more difficult for Polish farmers, Hungarian farmers, etc., etc. This is not really a surprise if for anyone who has been following the issue, because Ukraine is a huge player in the agricultural field. And that for a long time, when in the past, before the war, when people were talking about Ukraine potentially joining the EU, the weight of the Ukraine farming was always seen as an issue. So how do you analyze like this tension, this newfound tension or renewed tension between Polish farmers, Hungarian farmers, and on the other side Ukraine? And how do we maintain the balance between we need to support Ukraine and including its agriculture, and on the other side also, farmers from the bordering country also have to protect their market?
Okay, the first thing is that solidarity cannot be stopped with Ukraine. And when we are, equating national interests, we cannot lose perspective of what's really at stake. And what's really at stake is the independence and stability and peace in a territory, in a country that is being invaded, that is being destroyed, a country will be definitely very relevant in the future of the European Union in the next decades, who are striving to also to join us. So solidarity, we can't say, oh yes, we want to do as much as possible for Ukraine. Oh, but stop. Oh, wait, I remember I have national interests. Okay, but saying this, these things happening in Hungary and Poland, they're not new in terms of concerns, and we understand. We understand there are reasons for this discomfort and for these fears and for this range of local producers who have been struggling with many difficulties. What I don't think, and I'm being very candid about this, what I don't think is the best solution is to take unilateral decisions. I mean, we live in a European Union, and you cannot be asking for European Union when it's good for you. So yeah, Brussels, help us out, and at the same time, when it's not good for you, you take your own decisions, and we'll see it. It cannot be like this. We are integrated, 27 members doing their best to help out each other. We have seen in the past, and my country has suffered from that a lot. We have seen in the past how the lack of solidarity can affect countries. And by the way, all these things that we are also seeing in terms of populism and the extremes and the radicalization and the polarization, things don't quite appear from one day to another. And if we look back over the last 15 years, I would say Europe has been struggling a lot with the word solidarity among member states on various occasions. And so, of course, we understand, but taking unilateral decisions like this is not good. It's not the right way to go. It's not the way to help out in the best way possible the Polish and Hungarian farmers. And so I have problems in dealing and accepting this. And besides, this needs a more, I would say, integrated approach. It cannot be solved just by giving money, a few hundred or a few thousand to these or to Polish or to Hungarian farmers. We need to think about this in an integrated manner within the European Union, and not have national and unilateral approaches to this.
And speaking of integrated thinking and solutions, so assuming that Ukraine joins one day the EU, like I said, it's a big player in agriculture. Would there be plans to reform agriculture, so the EU CAP, to take into account the entrance of this giant, this agricultural giant in the EU, given that it would, let's say, upset the balance in farmers all around the EU in their competitiveness? Or do you think that the CAP is designed in a way that could handle, let's say, this the entry of a country like Ukraine?
Oh, that's the 1 million question. Yeah, I mean, we have to recognize Ukraine is a big player, and of course, I cannot predict the future, but obviously, a player of this dimension will definitely change many things. But European Union has been built on the need of thinking about changes, and it was 6, then 12, and now we have 27. We have been 28. I hope one day the UK will rejoin us. Will be back into the club. So European Union is made of this need, constant need of thinking about itself, its future, the revision of the treaties, and thinking about where it wants to go. I think that over the last years, the crises have been so many. We had the pandemics and now the war, but before that we had the sovereign crisis. And I don't like to refer to crisis when we talk about refugees, because it looks like they were causing the problem. And for various reasons, I have a very different thoughts on this. But all the things that we had over the last 15 years, again, didn't leave much time to think about deepening the integration process or to enlarge the integration process. But of course, this has to be thought. This has to be wisely approached in the near future, because we live in a very complex world, and we have candidates for many years who have been doing a lot of efforts to join the EU. Now we have Ukraine, and I'm sure we will have other states, and so of course we will have to rethink how to equate all these. But this is part of the European DNA. This is a project, and a project means that it's never finished. We have to think about it, and we have to redesign it along the way, and following the time and the circumstances of each time.
Moving away completely from agriculture and talking more about the EU in itself and its future in the last few minutes, we talked already about enlargement, so potential enlargement to Ukraine, to Moldova, maybe into the Balkan, etc. There's been a debate among member states on whether the EU should extend itself, so take on new members before reforming itself, so before doing a reform of the treaties. So what do you think? Should the EU disconnect the question of enlargement and treaty reform, or is there an actual need to first the EU reforming itself and sorting out its own problem before taking on new member states?
I think that the first question to answer is what is that European Union wants for itself in terms of being a global actor in the future, and giving an answer to this question will tell to the European Union why we should enlarge and how we should enlarge and where we should go. It's impossible not to think of this as a global player who wants to be able to stand up in a context where we have China, we have Russia, we have the United States, and so forth. Now, I personally, maybe I still have an academic approach to this as a teacher with this background. I would not disconnect the enlargement from the revision of the treaties. I personally, I don't see that it could bring advantages in the future to go for easier or quicker solutions. We have to be very sound and solid in the path we do as a European Union, because this is not just about a political option, a political decision, a political willingness that we have in a certain period of time. These are decisions that will impact over millions of people and over decades. So, the legal basis, the juridical fundamentals of an entity so particular, so sui generis as the European Union is, in my regard, as I see it, is really, really very important. And so I would not go for other sorts of approaches, because I tend to see that in the future, near future, or it depends a bit, but in the future it will bring a problem, definitely. So the revision of the treaties, I would say it's the sound way, the solid way of looking into the problem. But as I said, it's perhaps a more academic approach, and a more political approach would be different. But this is
you're not the only one to say that. I mean, if you listen to people like Olaf Scholz, even Emmanuel Macron, they are defending very much the idea that there must be EU reform before enlargement. And speaking of reform, let's assume you don't have to worry about having unanimity in the member states, etc. You just snap your fingers, you change whatever you want. If you have to change something about the EU, what do you change and why?
If I had to change something, if I could snap my fingers, I would help the European Union to solve the war in Ukraine. I know it's dreaming, but I don't know. I imagine this super capacity of being so respected that we could change history in this way. I know I'm being, but it's something that I would like to think as possible. I would change a sort of how do we say in English? It's not dubious, but sometimes a sort of lack of sharpness in the way the European Union stands in international negotiations. Because maybe because today I was in a meeting on fisheries. But it's difficult because when we are 27, it's difficult to speak at one voice. And sometimes you wonder, how come that one state that is not a member of the European Union and is not, a big super global power, how come it can be so difficult to negotiate with it? Because we are still, I don't know, we have this soft power. It's important that we keep this soft power, but sometimes it's I don't. We could be seen. We could be taken more seriously.
Okay, I see what you mean. Lack of hard power, let's say.
Yeah.
I see
not
what
military.
You...
Not military power.
Hard power is not only military.
Yeah.
Final question. It's 9. I promised I would stop at 9, so I will hold my promise with the final question, the traditional final question of all my interviews. Where do you stand on all the debates regarding a potential federal Europe? Are you in favor? Are you against? Not a particular opinion? What's your take?
Oh, I'm always a political science teacher in this regard. It's impossible for me to say I'm against or I'm in favor. I always tend to analyze all the angles. I know this is not how a politician usually approaches these things. They say, "Oh yeah, I'm in favor," or "I'm totally against." But for me, really, believe me, it's difficult not to have this analytical approach and think about the advantages and disadvantages. So yeah, please do not ask me that, because most likely I would give you a PhD thesis, but not a straightforward answer.
So we'll take the box. It's complicated.
Yeah, complicated. Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Isabel Carvalhais, for answering our question tonight. Before we leave you, like, if people have to remember one thing, one message from you tonight of this interview, what would be your message to them?
That there are different ways of doing politics. Politics can be done with the heart and mind, of course. And I believe in a kind of politics that is done with a positive dimension. That is, instead of just criticizing what others are doing or not doing, always referring to our political enemies, our rivals, or whatever. I believe very much in a sort of in a kind of politics that concentrates on what we are doing, what is that we can do to make things different. And I believe that this kind of politics can still have a place in our society, and we need that more, instead of just combating and fighting and conflict, because it's one of the reasons why so many people get away from politics and think that they have nothing to do with it. Politics is everywhere in our life. As citizens, we are all politicians. So what we have to do is to show to people what is that as citizens, as politicians, we can do for the collective good, for the well-being of everyone. That's what I would like people to think about when they see my name, and not.
Well, that's a message received. So thank you very much. Chat, make sure to thank Ms. Carvalhais for her time. You can follow her on Twitter. You have her ad just below the video feed, so don't hesitate to go follow her and see what she has to say in the future. Ms. Carvalhais, thank you again. I wish you a very good evening and good luck with the remaining work that you have to do tonight.
Yes. Don't worry. Thank you so much. It was a pleasure.
Likewise. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
All right, chat. Let's start the debriefing. Tell me everything. I'm cutting Zoom in the meantime. Up. End meeting. Tell me what you thought. And then I will take, as usual, my little notes on my notebook and we'll cover everything. All right. So, what did we discuss that was interesting? Many things were interesting, of course, as usual. I have to say, I didn't know about the circumstances of how she became an MEP. Like I saw, okay, she became an MEP in 2019, so I figured, okay, she was elected like normally, etc. So I didn't dig deeper. I have to confess. So when she said, oh yeah, I arrived in Parliament in September, I was like, why did she arrive in September? Normally, MEPs arrive. The opening of the opening of the mandate is in July traditionally. So the first, second, or I mean in July, MEP. That's the moment where they have the first formal sitting, and that's the moment where they become actually MEPs. And that's where then you have all for during July you have all the process of deciding in which committee they go, electing the chairs, etc. All let's say the administrative stuff. Parliamentary, legislative, administrative stuff that they have to do at the beginning of a mandate. So when she arrived in September, I said, why? And so the guy who was before on the list died. Okay, sorry about that. And indeed, like if she got the call, like okay, you're an MEP now. You have to show up in Strasbourg, in Brussels, or rather, like tomorrow or next week. See you tomorrow. I can understand that it might have been a bit challenging, particularly if she's she has a background as an academic, so perhaps she was like starting a year in university with a new students, and she's like, oh well, actually no, I have to move out. I'm an MEP now, so can't teach students this year. So it's true that it must have been a rather challenging, and also like she said, since she arrived. Not in July, she was elected, but she didn't become an MEP at the very beginning. That meant that she did not choose really her committees, because when MEPs are elected, and also they do that also 2 years and a half later, so at mid-mandate, when they arrive, there are negotiations that take place within each political groups to decide where do MEPs sit? In what committee are they going to? Who is going to go in the culture committee? Who is going to go in the legal affairs committee? Who is going to go in agriculture committee? Etc. etc. The way it works normally is, like I said, it's negotiation. So every MEP in every delegation, they will say, oh, me personally, I would like to go into culture committee and the regional affairs committee, because those are the topics that I like. And so the head of delegation, so in our case the head of the socialist Portuguese delegation, collected all the requests of everyone. Then they negotiated amongst themselves, say, okay, but we need someone in this committee because it's important politically, etc., etc. And then the head of delegation go meet all the other head of delegation, so the French socialists, the German socialists, the Italian socialists, etc., and they will negotiate among each other, because let's say that in IMCO, which is one of the internal market committee, which is one of the most important committee in the parliament, the socialists will only have, 10 seats for the entire group. And of course, many more than 10 people want to go in the IMCO committee. So there needs to be negotiations between the head of delegation to say, okay, within the 10, okay, there will be one French, one German, one this, and so they negotiate among themselves, trading places. Okay, well, I wanted to have someone in the Foreign Affairs Committee. Okay, I'm ready to give that seat up if you give me a seat in that other committee. So there's a whole negotiation at the beginning of the mandate around to decide where do MEPs sit. Usually, the way it works is the MEP will have one committee that he really wanted, and then he will have a committee that either was a secondary objective or that it was the result of the negotiation. So he or she's going to sit in a completely different committee that initially wanted. And then in her case, she arrived after that. So all the deals were done. So she couldn't choose really a committee. The guy that she replaced unfortunately died, and she had to take the committees that he had. She didn't have a choice. So she worked on she is an academic on in political sciences. She worked on social inclusion, on democracy, etc. And so she said, well, now you work in agriculture. So there must have been a bit of a challenge initially because you arrive in a committee that you don't know, possibly that you're not fully interested in at the beginning, because I mean there's always ways to find something interesting in a committee. That when you start digging, you will always find something that you find that is interesting at some level. But at the beginning you're like, oh, okay, that's what I'm gonna spend the next 2 years and a half or 5 years, etc. That can be a bit challenging, but okay, that was good honor. Our answer on rural were a bit superficial. Better communicate how inclusive we are. That won't fix much. I see your point. I agree that I didn't want to dig too much into that because my reference point was French politics, so I don't know how it is in the Portuguese left. But indeed, when I say to solve the problem of the left in rural areas, we just need to better communicate. I'm not sure that's the answer. Even if she recognizes, they'd say, yeah, okay, we have to stop looking at rural areas as second-rate areas, second-rate citizens. We have to see them for what they are, the contribution that they can make, and we have to provide them with services. So, to an extent, she does say that you can't just say, oh well, let's focus on the urbans and forget about the specificities of rural people. So, but I agree that just saying, okay, let's communicate better, that might have been not necessarily the option. It seems like the Commission did take toward the member states' bans. That I will cover. I will cover afterwards the Commission and the Polish ban. I mentioned it in the last news review, so I had the information about that. We talked about what we talked about BBB after a question from Andrew. So what is BBB? BBB is a party that I don't want to say rose to prominence, but won was it like senatorial elections or regional elections in the Netherlands a months ago or something like that, and it was a bit of a surprise for everyone because this party came out of nowhere. It came out of nowhere. It was not an established party. It's a party that initially started as a party from and for Dutch farmers. It was built in reactions to a Dutch policy, provincial elections. Thank you. It was meant as a reaction of farmers after the policy of the Netherlands regarding farmers. Let me explain. There is a specific policy that finds its origin in EU law, which is to limit the nitrate pollution. So nitrates are a chemical that you find in a bunch of agricultural entrants or things that you what is it called? Un engrais. Something to help grow stuff. I forget the name in English. Sorry. So there's a lot. This is used a lot in these kind of things. Fertilizer. It's used in a lot of fertilizer, and it's polluting, notably water. And so the law, because of the EU law, say okay, we need to limit the around waterways the pollution with nitrate. The Dutch government say okay, in that case we're going to buy all the farmlands around within the perimeter around protected areas, around waterways, etc. And so they were forcing farmers, a number of farmers, to stop their business because they were just buying their things. Okay, that's it. You can't. The law says you can't. So you're no longer allowed to do farming in this area because of the nitrate. And they were buying out people out of their farms and pissed off, and of course, a number of Dutch farmers. And they created this movement, this party that became BBB. That started as a representative of farmer. Very more radical answer, let's say, to the policy, etc. And this election of this BB, which was the first time they ever got elected, attracted the attention, let's say, of everyone. Say, is this like a sign of things to come, or how will this, what started as a protest movement, become react when they enter the actual political arena, when they don't have to just talk about farming, they have to talk about plenty of different topics, etc. Are they going to transform into like a proper party, or are they going to collapse on themselves as a one-party issue? Which EP group do you think the interest of EU farmers represent the interest of EU farmers the most? Well, traditionally, farmers, let's say, have more friends in the EPP, ECR. Yeah, more on the right wing. Farmers usually from, let's say, part of Renew Europe to ECR and part of far right. Yeah, that will be those who are the most sensitive, I would say, from... They were already elected in the second chamber? Huh. I've read that it was the first time. Okay. And so then why was it such a big news if they were already an established party? Because I understood that it was the first time for them to be elected. What did I miss? But yeah, to Andrew's point, yeah, right wing, first time for first chamber. Okay. So yeah, from right wing, let's say those are the most sensitive, let's say, to the main farmers' interest. I mean, there are some portion of farming that are more closer to the Greens, etc. But I would say the bigger part is more you will find them closer, let's say, to the right wings. Even if in socialists you have a lot of people defending farmers, etc. But if we oversimplify, let's say, more on the right wing. The more farmer parties get representation in parliament, the better chance they have to get their point across. I mean, yeah, if they get elected, yeah, de facto, yes. Although there's you have to keep in mind the difference between an interest group and a political party. A political party is meant to not only represent, is not meant to represent the interest of just one group. It can be closer to one group, etc. But normally, a political party is supposed to represent ultimately everyone and have, let's say, a societal project. While on the contrary, you take a union, a syndicate, a lobby, or whatever, they are there to exclusively protect the interest of that. But like a lobby is not a political party, a union is not a political party because their objectives are different. So it's that doesn't mean, like, for instance, that every farmer organization in the EU should run for elections, because that's not their functions. That's not the function of what that's not their function. That's not what they're supposed to do. And that's not what these elections are supposed to do. What else did we get to talk? Yeah, the question of appellation. I'm just looking at the time. Yeah, okay, I have 15 minutes more, so we're fine. You disagree. Oh, let's agree to disagree then. The function of a politician is not to defend just one interest group. Can have at heart an interest group, but they're not just there to protect one interest group. Or it's called a single issue party, but those are extremely they extreme minority, and yeah, it's not exactly common parties. And usually, if they grow, they start going around. Where was I? Yeah, the appellation thing. So the idea indeed that indeed it's banned. It's forbidden in the EU to call milk something that is not milk. Like dairy product, the only thing that can be called milk is dairy product. You can't call like soy milk. You can't call that milk. You have to find another appellation. This is done to protect also on the economic interest, and to protect the interest of the industry, to avoid the substitution, etc. of their product with other things. But there's also a point, to an extent, of consumer protection, which the MEP acknowledge and recognize, in the sense that the appellation can be, in some cases, mistaking some consumers who don't necessarily look at the details and don't think about this thing, and lead to problematic situation. Like I've read like an example in the US where I think in fact it was in the US where a baby had to be sent to the hospital because the baby basically was starving because he was lacking key nutrients, because his parents were feeding the baby with soy milk, almond milk, and not actual milk. So of course that became a bit of a health issue for a baby that needs very specific nutrients, and is for reason the reason why baby drink milk. And so indeed, to avoid situations like this, certain things, there is a control of the appellation of some things. That's actually pretty common. You're making me lose faith in humanity. Saying me that kids end up in the hospital on a regular basis because of that, you're making me lose faith in humanity, Andreas. But okay, well, that's... Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of issues around that, and so a couple of years ago there was a big debate in the EU because there was an amendment in the I think it was the CAP, so the EU agricultural policy, where there was an amendment to forbid vegan burger from being called burger, from being sold as burger. You had a family feeding on light? What do you call a family feeding on light? What does that mean, feeding on light? They're just putting the kid outside as a plant. They think it works as a plant? How does that work? No, come on. Seriously. Seriously, like sunshine. What do they think, that people are sunflowers? I mean, come on. I mean, at this point, it's criminal. Yeah, at this point we're getting into criminal behavior, but yeah, that's proof to the point that yeah, sometimes there is a reason why you ban things that seems to be a bit common sense. And so going back to my point, there was this debate around, could we call veggie burger a burger or not, or is a burger only composed of meat? There was a whole discussion about around this, and she made the point. One of the points that was made in favor of, not necessarily of banning, but against calling something a veggie burger a burger. So yeah, I mean, if you're a vegetarian, a vegan, you don't want to eat meat, you don't want to buy something that is called like the meat that the thing that you reject. That's stupid. Find another name for it, etc. It's a bit more marketing than anything. But yeah, it was still a big debate. The amendment was rejected, so there was no ban, so to say, in the EU on this, but that was a pretty they made the headlines, let's say, back then. What else we talked about rural areas, so the fact that they should not be abandoned politically. I thought it was pretty interesting, the point that she made on the perception of the wrong perception of rural areas as just being there to feed the cities, that their only reason to exist is to support cities, and otherwise there's nothing to be nothing there. That it's everyone said, it's great to go to the countryside, you can rest, you don't have the noise, etc. But then when you live there on a daily basis, if you don't have any services, etc., that's not exactly the best. Far from it, and it can lead to people getting let's say more radicalized. And she did mention indeed that for instance in Brexit there was there was a good part of rural areas that voted for Brexit because of this feeling of disenfranchisement. I don't even know if that's a word. I know it's a word in French, but not in English. Like of being like left aside. It's something that you found as well in the US. It's one of the factors that led to the rise of populism in the mid 2010s. The feeling that people had of being left behind in rural areas, but not only. Also works in cities that used to be industrial cities. poor areas, etc. They have a feeling that they've been left behind, and that they're being abandoned. And so, as a reaction to this, they vote for populist party. And one of these reasons, this is one of the reasons why Trump got elected, Brexit passed, etc. This feeling of being left behind by globalization, by the EU, by a certain idea of them, compared to a certain idea of themselves that they had, etc., etc. The funny thing is that BBB always talks about farmers being essential as they feed everyone. They always talk about this. That makes sense. I mean, from their perspective, yeah, that's a pretty common argument from farmers. So, given that BBB comes from the farmers, that I'm not too surprised by this. And that's why I said it was interesting that Isabel Carvalhais made this point, because it was echoing a number of arguments that you hear more from the farmer side, and not that you would expect necessarily from someone coming from the left, working on sustainable agriculture. It was interesting to say no, there is, you can't leave this region behind. You can't. These people are not just there to feed cities. They have the reason to exist. You have to provide them with services, etc. There's the question of the aging population in farmers. So she said that I didn't know the exact age, but the average age of farmers in the EU is 65. I would say that's not good news for EU farming for the next 20 years, if that's that. Because even if you do a lot of things with machines, etc., there will be an impact clearly on food production and and even the transfer of knowledge, etc. So that's a bit worrying, I would say. She said that we should not look at the rural just to feed us. What they indeed do almost then fair. Okay. There's two different things. I think it shows that farmers themselves feel the need to justify themselves to get people to care about them. They don't expect people to inherently think they matter. There's a point there. I think they both are not incompatible. Both points are not incompatible. I think the arguments of farmers and BBB by saying, oh yeah, but we are essential because we feed you, is a way to say you need us. You can't make us disappear by pushing all these policies for sustainability, fighting climate change, because you will get rid of us, and if you get rid of us, you're losing your food. So that's a bit the point that they're making. Say you need us. So for me, it's more of this BBB argument is more a way of catching the attention. But beyond that, there's the deeper argument that is we matter. We're not just there. Our concerns are not just there to produce food, and it's the bigger thing. But I see the BBB argument as a way to catch attention, to remind that there are city people. Don't forget that you need us today. We're not just, that's not our sole function, etc. But you need us. We feed you. So I think it's also a way for to justify the people caring about them. And I do agree that I don't think they expect people to inherently think they matter. I mean, look at the suicide rate. The suicide rate among farmers is among the highest. It's huge. So yeah, people don't commit suicide if they believe that people think they matter, if they think people will help them, etc. It's rather the contrary. So that's indeed a big issue there. On the perception of rural areas, of farmers, and also the image they have of themselves, and the tension between them, because they see themselves as being essential, but at the same time they see that society doesn't care about them. Funny, but in all textbooks in school, the story of the Paris Commune was used to demonstrate how the big cities rely on the farmers to feed them, and never to forget that. Oui, year. I mean, the commune is, I mean, it's not big cities relying on farmers to feed them. I mean, the commune. So if you refer to the commune, the revolt, the revolution movement within Paris at the end of the 19th century, the end of the commune was not because farmers didn't feed them. It was because the army was sent in there. Let's say it's not. It was not a point of the farmer. It's a point of sending the army. Let's say here the point I would say. Anyway, moving on. Final point before I have to go. Yeah, but why they could hold out for that long was thanks to farmers. I don't know. My knowledge of the commune is a bit rusty. I have to admit. So, question mark. I do not know. Okay, final topic. Farmers and Ukraine. So indeed, we discussed that in the last news review. A couple of weeks ago, 4 countries bordering Ukraine, so Poland, Hungary, Slovakia, and Romania, decided to ban the entry on their territory of agricultural products from Ukraine, which under EU treaty, not EU treaties, but trade agreement between the EU and Ukraine, and also various supporting measures taken by the EU. These products were supposed to be able to enter the EU, notably to reach the sea and then be exported elsewhere. Why did they ban that? For starters, because farmers were seeing this entrance of Ukrainian agricultural products as competing with their own, and leading to a big loss, reduction in prices, which of course is bad for them, even in times of inflation. And of course, this led to tensions. And bearing in mind, it started in Poland. Poland is having an election in October, and the government piece needs the farmers and the rural areas vote to be elected. So under the pressure of the farmers, they decide to act to prevent the entrance of this Ukrainian agricultural product on their territory, which was illegal. Although it's not illegal. It was debated, but let's say experts tend very largely towards the idea that it was illegal, because normally trade is an exclusive competence of the EU. So and since it's a question of goods entering the single market, only the Commission can decide to forbid goods from entering the single market, particularly when it concerns a country with which there is a trade agreement with the EU. That being said, it was a question of at least in Poland, of an electoral question because of pressure of farmers before the election. The other country had also to avoid tensions with their own farmers, and it was a way to, let's say, I think, shock the EU into action, because the issue is not new, and this country have been raising this concern since end of last year, September, October. So it was not something. The concern was not unknown, let's say, to Brussels, etc. But member state had chosen not to act upon it, because the priority was given to solidarity with Ukraine. And so after the ban was announced, the Commission negotiated with the member states, etc. The member states were pushing back also on what Poland, Romania, Hungary, and Slovakia did. And in the end, like, to, let's say, buy the peace, the Commission agreed, say, okay, we're going to write a check to the farmers in these countries to compensate them for the fact that they've been suffering from losses because of the Ukraine products. We are going to set up a ban on certain agricultural products in the EU for a few months. When I say certain, it's only goods, Ukraine goods, agricultural goods, cereals, etc., that are meant to stay in the market, in the Polish market, the Hungarian market, the Slovakian market, and Romanian market. All the rest that goes outside this country, even in transit or other part of the EU, they can't prevent the circulation. But on a temporary basis, Ukraine will not be able to, for a few months, send cereal for the Polish market, for the Hungarian market, etc., etc. So that's a bit the deal that was found between the EU and these countries, on the condition, of course, that the countries remove their unilateral ban of the Ukrainian products, which so far they have not done yet. But this is also a reminder that despite all the message of support of Poland and a big part of the Eastern Europe, apart from Hungary, we are in support of Ukraine joining the EU. There's been resistance in the past about it, precisely because of agriculture, because Ukraine is a huge player in the cereal market, in the agricultural market, etc. And so there is a fear from farmers in the EU that if Ukraine joins the EU, they will be flooded by Ukrainian products. They cannot be competitive compared to Ukrainian prices. The Ukrainian farmers are going to just get all the money from the CAP that before was going to other countries. So there's a lot of worries from these from the agricultural sector around the idea of Ukraine joining the EU. That was put under the rug since the beginning of the war in Ukraine. But now this is the concerns are coming back, let's say, to the foray there. So yeah, it's all that to say that when we were talking about the adhesion of Ukraine in the EU, there's a lot of issues there. I say it's not as easy as just okay, we support them politically and that's it. Let's let them join in. There were other concerns before that are still there, even if they have been put a bit in the back since the war in Ukraine. And yeah, that's pretty much what I had. I mean, to keep it short because I see the time. Any topic you want me to discuss very briefly before I conclude? You have your shot while I drink. Otherwise, I conclude. Alright. No. Lula visit. So Lula visit. Lula, so Prime Minister, President of Brazil is coming to Spain for a state visit. It will be interesting because prior to that visit, Lula had been sending contradictory messages to the EU, notably when it comes to support to Ukraine. Lula had been saying, "Oh yeah, but you know, there's no good guys, no bad guys. The EU and the US should stop sending the weapons to feed the conflict. So you know, it's not black and white, etc." Since then, after the EU and the US said, "What the fuck," they, let's say, made a new statement saying, "Oh, but still Russia is the aggressor, so they should leave the country." So they try to, let's say, save a bit face there. But it's going to be interesting to see what Lula has to say when it comes to Spain, when it comes to Ukraine, and also when it comes to the EU-Mercosur deal, trade deal. So there's a trade deal being negotiated between the EU and Mercosur, which is, I don't want to say the equivalent of the EU, but a regional organization in South America with Brazil and all the countries around. And this deal is in the freezer for now because on paper because there was Bolsonaro, the previous president from the far right, and there was worries that the deal would feed climate change, etc. So there was a renegotiations of following the election of Lula. There was the idea of renegotiating part of the Mercosur to make it a bit greener. And now the question is whether Lula will follow along or not, and to what extent. So it will be interesting to see that and the capacity of the EU to, let's say, bring Brazil closer to the EU. Why in the past few years it has been closer to China, to Russia because of trade relations, trade dependency. Like Andres is saying, Brazil relies on Russian fertilizer, etc., etc. So there's an effort these days of the EU to try to win back a number of countries outside the EU, developing countries, big developing countries, to get them back from Russia and China. Okay, that's what. I mean, I see your other topic, but I have to go. Still have things to do and have to eat. So I'm going to call it for today. We can discuss all this next time. Next time is, I don't know. I haven't done the schedule yet. I know I have an interview in French next week, but I haven't done the schedule for the news review. So the best thing you can do is follow me on the other social media, Discord, Twitter, and all that. That's where I post all the schedule and all that. Up there you go. You have all the links there. You can click. If you like what you saw in Centauri the case, do follow the channel. If you have an Amazon Prime lying around, send it my way. Always helps. It's always appreciated. And on this note, I wish you all a good end of the week, and I will see you next time. Bye bye everyone. See you.